Thank you for joining me once again for these studies in the book known as the Gospel or Good News of Mark. A book, we remind ourselves, that was written by one of Jesus' contemporaries and followers to tell the remarkable but true account of the life of Jesus. Today we come to chapter 8 verses 1 to 13, which I will, as usual, first read to you. Mark says, "During those days another large crowd gathered. Since they had nothing to eat, Jesus called his disciples to him and said, 'I have compassion for these people. They've already been with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. If I send them home hungry, they will collapse on the way because some of them have come a long distance.' His disciples answered, 'But where in this remote place can anyone get enough bread to feed them?' 'How many loaves do you have?' Jesus asked. 7, they replied. He told the crowd to sit down on the ground. When he'd taken the 7 loaves and given thanks, he broke them and gave them to his disciples to distribute to the people. And they did so. They had a few small fish as well. He gave thanks for them also and told the disciples to distribute them. The people ate and were satisfied. Afterwards, the disciples picked up 7 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. About 4,000 were present. After he'd sent them away, he got into the boat with his disciples and went to the region of Dalmanutha. The Pharisees came and began to question Jesus to test him. They asked him for a sign from heaven. He sighed deeply and said, 'Why does this generation ask for a sign? Truly, I tell you, no sign will be given to it.' Then he left them, got back into the boat and crossed to the other side." As we've studied his gospel together, we've discovered that Mark wants to persuade us of something that he himself finds incredible. That Jesus was God in human form, God incarnate, and that Jesus was the one God had promised for ages past as the one who would deliver the world from the predicament occasioned by its sin. Mark's already offered lots of evidence to support his claims, but as his book develops, there is a slight change of emphasis. At first, Mark has been keen to show the evidence, but then gradually he begins to tell us stories about Jesus that challenge his readers and each one of us. If Jesus is who Mark says he is, how are we to respond? And what will the life of a disciple of Jesus look like? So we come to the present passage. It's a familiar story and almost a repetition of the earlier miracle of the feeding of the 5,000 men as well as women and children. However, this second quite remarkable feeding miracle, where Jesus feeds a vast crowd, appears to be recorded so that, reflecting upon it, Mark's readers, and that of course includes us, might be challenged to and encouraged in the path of Christian discipleship. Let's dig a bit deeper into the story, and especially explore why Mark included 2 feeding miracles, apart of course from the fact that both actually happened. I think that miracles of Jesus are acted parables. Along with the parables, then, they are means of teaching those who are attentive. So why these 2 stories? In our study of the earlier miracle, we noticed that the Old Testament predicted the coming kingdom of the promised deliverer or Messiah and spoke of his kingdom with language drawn from a great banquet. We suggested there that the earlier feeding miracle was intended to point to Jesus as the one who had been promised by God. However, and I think this is very significant, the 2 miracles have different locations. The earlier feeding of what we know as the feeding of the 5,000 apparently took place in Galilee, whereas this occurs in the Decapolis, the area we have already seen which was not Jewish territory. Once again, we discover that Jesus' kingdom will include vast numbers of women, men and children, but here that this kingdom stretches beyond the community of those who are ethnically Jewish. Again, then, we're reminded that Jesus fulfills the promises made to the Jewish nation. He is their king, but his kingdom is not limited to a small piece of land on the shores of the Eastern Mediterranean, nor to the Jewish people themselves. His kingdom extends to all people and way beyond Palestine. He is the world's king. Once more, then, Mark seems to be making the point that Jesus has an exclusive claim over everyone who has ever lived or will ever live, and therefore that claim extends to you and to me. However, as our passage unfolds, we're told that tragically there will be those who ought to be members of this kingdom, but will be unable to enter through their failure to welcome Jesus. There's something profoundly sad and depressing about this. The Pharisees were a group of people who, as we already know, had witnessed at first or second hand many of the things which Jesus did. Moreover, they could not deny it. What they could, however, do was explain it away. Jesus' exorcisms, they said, were inspired by the devil, as we've already seen. And here his provision of bread on earth is countered by a wish for a sign from heaven. This is apparently significant. Moses, whom they idolized, had provided bread for a vastly larger number of people and for 40 years. And it was not multiplied loaves and fishes, but food that came from the sky. So they argue. They need a far greater miracle to persuade them as to whom Jesus is. However, later, when such a miracle did occur, even the fact of the empty tomb would not elicit their faith in him. In fact, the problem with the Pharisees is one that we can all too easily share. They suffered from moral blindness, so that they were darkened in their minds, so that they couldn't see or reason out the truth when it stared them in the face. This is a tremendous warning, and an exposure of the disease which produces the symptoms of unbelief that are listed here. For those of us who are believers, it is at one and the same time both a warning and an encouragement. We need to be sure that we're not blinkered by worldliness in such a way that the truth is wasted on us. But we need to recognize too that ultimately, though there will be many gathered into the kingdom, we shall sometimes meet with failure, which is not our fault, but the result of a failure of hearing. But the challenge is more general. All too often the reason that people like you and me cannot see the challenges that the evidence of Jesus' life brings is that we will not see. We refuse to look. We notice then that Jesus abandoned these people. There was nothing he could do to reveal himself to them. As we sometimes say, there's none so blind as those who will not see. But we cannot end on such a harsh note in the present study, for Jesus' harshness to those who would not believe is more than made up by his compassion to even the run-of-the-mill needs of those who sought him out. This reminds us then that there is no need so menial that Jesus will not stoop to meet it, and none, however intractable, that he does not have the power to resolve. Moreover, not only does he have the power, but his compassion is such that it always reaches out to the needy, as he does in this story, even before the people really recognize themselves that they were hungry. What a delightful and attractive picture of King Jesus, so unlike earthly kings and authorities, even religious ones. This is then a lovely passage. It's intended to teach us that Jesus is the world's king. He has claims on us all. But his kingdom is unlike any other. And following him is like following no other. He's ready to embrace all, whatever their social standing or ethnic origin. And his call is one that is offered with extraordinary tenderness and will be accompanied by compassion and an incredible sensitivity to all our needs, even before we know them ourselves. And so he awaits my response, and he awaits yours too.